Hello Joy, and welcome back to this beautiful setting here at the Sanctuary of Healing in Lango. I've come here to talk on this occasion about your new book, which is called Pregnancy and Birth, A New Generation. It's not only a self-help guide, but it's also for health practitioners to use as a reference book. What the title doesn't give away, having read it, is that it's much more than a maternity book. It's a whopping 736 pages, and it covers a very comprehensive range of topics. What I'd like to look at in particular today is the topic of rape and abuse that women suffer from, and that you outline here and give some details on, and about supporting women through those problems.
Well, thank you, Sarah, and it's wonderful to be back at the Sanctuary. Yes, women's health and especially abuse is I'm very, very passionate about. It's something that I have worked with women on. The lack of respect for women as well is something that pushes my buttons, and from a personal point of view. But from a practical point of view, I wanted to input about different aspects of women's health, apart from pregnancy, and which is just one thing that a woman will do. The abuse for women is very topical at the moment, as we have Angelina Jolie and the UK government getting heavily involved, with the William Hague leading the charge on this for rape and war. The rape of women during war is not new. It's been around a very, very long time, and they have used rape to create fear through the ages. The thing with what happens today is that we are more enlightened, and we should know better. I mean, obviously, there are parts of the world, and what they have been looking at is in parts of Africa, and it doesn't happen all over the world from war. But there is this level of aggression in certain cultures that perpetuate it, and certainly in places like Africa, where women are shunned and not allowed to go back to their family, so end up in prostitution or living very meagre lives through their events. One of the things that I have done is that training practitioners of how to work specifically with women with abuse, with rape. And obviously there are women that get raped in the Western world as well. And again, it's more prevalent than we know, and the emotional impacts from that, the psychological impacts, are absolutely massive. Not only does it lead to depression and panic attacks, lack of self-worth, self-esteem, self-confidence, but it also affects us physically. The bladder, for instance, will collect that fear, and women become incontinent. From the rape, they may end up having lots of infections and even further sexual diseases and disorders that they have to live with. And certainly in Africa, of course, this is the way AIDS is transmitted. They may even end up being, by being raped, being pregnant. And obviously then, depending upon their religious connections as to whether that is frowned upon or not. I mean, even in Ireland, they do not agree to abortion, and they still have the ethos that a woman should go on to have the child, even though it's not created from the right circumstances. So we have some very archaic thinking and archaic behaviour that is very primal, and there are again those that are born from a level of aggression which again is created from the womb, will go on to be bullies and aggressive to their women. Obviously, there are the attributes of the. We need to put a lot more in place other than highlighting the effect of war and rape. It happens every day, and for even within marriage, there will be women who are raped constantly, and that will be normal for them. And the other aspect is that if we have men and women from dysfunctional families and they have seen their mother being bullied or their father being bullied, then that would be seen as normal. And again, they follow with example. They copy what they are shown. And these children will then go on to what I call create the sins of the fathers. They continue those traits because they don't know anything else. And in their world, that is normal. And for a girl that comes from a dysfunctional family or a family that's bullied or where the child has been raped from an early age, from incest and so on, that again will be normal for them. And they will look for partners that will beat them up. I have dealt with women where they have been beaten up. And I've said to them, well, how did you feel about this relationship? Well, he cared about me, and he cared about me enough to beat me. From my point of view, that's a very skewed way of thinking and about the relationship. Yeah. But if they haven't known love and nurturing and caring, then they go to excessive lengths to have interaction. And again, this can be through rape and abuse. So we are creating societies where they think this is normal rather than abnormal, and they will continue with those traits until they know differently. So very much there is education, there is information that we need to create, and we actually create these bullying tactics, as I say, aggression that will come from the womb. But we need to, from our families, from within the homes, the mothers need to teach their children that it is not normal to bully and beat and to rape. And we need that education in schools from a young age to care for one another rather than have this split in genders. We have this split in genders where males in some cultures are revered and they can do nothing wrong. They have the best of everything. And the girls are treated like slaves or not nurtured at all. They're expected to bring up the children. They're expected to do the housework. They're expected to do all of these household things, and that is their role. And we are still, in some cases, living in very dark ages with those outlooks on life. So it is more than, from my point of view, from creating an awareness. We have to do something about it. And although cognitive is what we've had in the past, for me, that's tip of the iceberg. These women live with panic attacks, they're frightened to go out, depression, they become depressives, they can't cope with life and live in total fear in some cases. I heard it's going back a few years ago now, but I heard about a woman, I think she was Romanian or something like that. It was a young girl, and it came to light because she was Catholic and she had been raped by this guy, and because of her religion she wasn't allowed to have an abortion. She was very fearful. She was only about 16, 17, and it was reported that the guy knew where she lived and stood outside her window every day and just stood and stared at the window of where she lived. And the fear that it created in this woman, and obviously the fear in her child that she was carrying, that would have been so devastating for her, that there was no one to protect her. She must have felt very, very abandoned by the whole situation. And because of her living where she lived, and because of the beliefs of those people, she was put through purgatory. And it's absolutely inhumane, as far as I'm concerned, to be able to make that judgment on somebody and probably ruin their lives. I mean, obviously, I don't know how that woman went on. Certainly, from my perspectives, and with the DARE training, for those who want to specialise in helping women, abuse and physical abuse, mental abuse, of course, which is very rife within relationships and within the home. And it's something that we can help with Dissolve and Resolve Emotions, and we've been able to turn women around to gain their self-esteem again, to gain their respectability, and to start to make a life for themselves again, removing the post-traumatic stress and the terror, absolute terror that they live with. One of my students was given the opportunity to work with an African woman. She had come from one of these war-torn areas in Africa, and she had been gang raped, and gang raped many, many times. Her children watched it all, so they must have been in huge trauma as well. And she was in this country as a refugee. For 4 years, she had been going through the medical system. They had tried absolutely everything. Psychology, psychotherapy, she had even had acupuncture. She had complete bladder incontinence. She was just a broken and messed up woman. And my student was asked, as a way of, well, we just don't know what else to do with her. We'll try some alternative therapy. This woman did not speak English. She knew very, very little English. There was no interpreter. And so the woman was asked to lie down, and my student worked with her for 2 hours, removing the shock and the terror that she held. That was everywhere within her. And the woman left, smiled for the first time when she had finished with the session. And she was brought back, I think, a week later. And the whole demeanour of this woman had changed. She was standing straighter, taller, and you could see that there was some confidence returning to this lady. And again, another session of helping to remove the trauma and the post-traumatic stress from her. Unfortunately, my student only had the opportunity of 2 sessions with this lady. But what it proved was that the techniques spoke for themselves. It did the work. We didn't need any communication. We just worked with the body and the impacts on that body. And the second time that the lady was treated, again at the end of the session, she showed her gratitude, and she was very, very grateful, and could feel the difference, obviously.
Yeah. You spoke earlier about the impacts of the children that are born when the relationship isn't as it should be. How would Dissolve and Resolve Emotions work with the whole family when the child perhaps felt some of the emotions in the womb, was aware of the mother? Can you explain that, please?
There are when somebody arrives, adult or child, you just don't know what you're going to find, the depths of that. For instance, there was a guy that came to see me. He was very, very mixed up. He was in his 30s, and he was labelled as schizophrenic, the poor man had to plan. We had about 4 or 5 different phone calls of opportunities of appointments, and he didn't know until he got up in the morning whether he would be able to come or not. It was that close call. And so I had a phone call, and he travelled halfway across the country to come and see me. And he arrived, and we had agreed that if he came, I would treat him a second time the following day. And he was in a terrible mess. This man had been on all sorts of drugs. He had been on social recreational drugs. He had turned to drink. And when I started to talk to him about his birth, he said, I have no idea about my type of birth. No idea. My mother was diagnosed as having post-traumatic stress when she was pregnant. He didn't see his mother. He was brought up by his grandmother. And he said, my mother doesn't talk about it. And obviously this poor child was bombarded with the hormonal repercussions of the mother's state at that time. And he said, life is hell. Life is not enjoyable, it's just pure hell. And from his perspective, it was. He said he hadn't been able to mix with anybody, he couldn't interact with people. To have a relationship he tried it, but it didn't work out, and it was very short-lived. So this poor man was existing day to day. And I would say that he has been one of the worst cases I've ever seen of inheritance from the mother, from the womb. Because he had taken on his mother's anxiety and mental state. For him, he was very hyperactive, and of course he had things to calm him down and so on and so forth. What happens is that the frontal cortex is developed differently, and now that we have the scans that we can do of the brain, we have the equipment, the IT has moved on so we can prove these things. And it's now acknowledged that psychopaths and other people with schizophrenia and things like that, they have a very, very different brain patterning. And sometimes the brain can miss whole areas of formation. And so these people have no understanding of what love is because they are numb, completely numb and cold, which is what he was. He was completely numb and cold. And there is no recognition of facial expressions or kindness. It doesn't mean anything to them because they haven't got the brain formation to go with it. And so I worked with this guy removing all the impacts that he had absorbed, and obviously he'd had plenty of those in his life, in his living life as well as in the fetal state. And when I finished, he said, I feel completely different, will it last? And I said, well, I think so. And so he was amazed at the difference. He was carrying 90% of his mother's issues and living from that perspective. And, when you have children developed like this within a family environment, these children can feel very abandoned. They don't bond with the parents. And it is essential that the child bonds with the parents. And those opportunities, we talked about windows in the Earthwork and Global Reach programming. We have these windows of where a time frame of where we can bond with the parent. If you go beyond that time, then the things happen to the child. They start to close down and again become numb. They don't understand love then, and so on. And I've treated women where they have told me that they didn't feel anything for their child until they were 15 months old. And when you look at the trauma those mothers went through in their own particular birthing process, where they had huge traumas from C-section, or the delivery was long and arduous and so on, they go into post-traumatic stress, and they become numb, and they go into the robotic function. And this is again what happens to women that have been raped. They go into robotic function. They don't feel anymore. They can't cope anymore. And it's a form of closing down from a heart level. And so these children grow to be aggressive, and they grow to be bullies. In the book, I show a trial that was done with 2 and 3-year-olds, that was done by psychiatrists, where they brought a group of children together. So many of the children came from dysfunctional families, and another group of children came from bullying families. And so these children were put in a room and observed while they played. And children being children, they both want the same toy. And one grabbed it and the other one started crying. And the child that was crying, some of the children gathered around her, and one of them started patting her on the back. There. And then he started shouting. And the patting became much heavier, to the point of where they had to go in and rescue the child. But obviously this child was only mirroring what it was used to, and mirroring what is done to them. And we have to be very, very careful what we show our children. We need to have structures in place about good parenting. And obviously if you have a parent that is depressive and anxious, then they need help. And they need help to deal with their issues, rather than, from my point of view, from an emotional level rather than from a cognitive level, because it's just the tip of the iceberg. And while you are doing that, very often it comes back to their own birth and their own environment of where they were brought up and how they were brought up. So again, they may know no difference. And we need to teach people the difference. And through that, you can then have more peaceful families and more respect for each other.
You mentioned earlier something that you called sins of the fathers, and in the explanation that you've just given there with the example of the small child turning to more aggressive ways, through the dissolve and resolve emotions treatment, does it then clear the child of those patterns, thus clearing the sins of the father?
Yes, absolutely it does. We have emotional triggers, and when we have emotions, or we're in an environment of things repeating themselves, it creates deeper patterns within us and deeper behaviour patterns. With the aggressive side, the emotions create behaviour, the behaviour creates emotions, emotions create chemical reactions that create more of the same. And so we go round in this vicious circle. Very often, as the case study I spoke about before, is that we are living somebody else's world and reactions from that. One of the other trials I show within the book is about the trial done on monkeys, where they took chimps, or apes, they took apes from a very young age and fed them, cared for them in that way with feeding and cleaning. But what they did, they had a metal, what we would call a metal frame, where they would put their bottle or their food into this metal frame. And the ape would go and retrieve the food or the milk and go into a corner to eat it. They then took another group of apes and they swaddled this metal frame And these apes would take their food from the metal frame, but the swaddling that was around it, and would cuddle up to it and eat and drink there. The behaviour of these apes were very, very different. The ones that had the swaddling, so it brought a little bit of comfort, warmth, were more gentle. The ones from the metal frame, where they took the food and went into a corner, grew very strong, but hugely aggressive. And they would kill one another to that extent of aggression. So, you know, it really, really proves to me that we need this level of nurturing and comfort. It's something that it is an innate core needing from us. It's something that we want throughout our lives. We want that touch. We want that feeling of being nurtured, cared for, acknowledged, even to that, level of survival, of being nurtured, being cared for, and being within an environment that is safe. Those are primary needs for us, and our primal needs. And so if we don't get that, we feel abandoned, and therefore we don't feel that safety, and we live from a survival level, and we lash out. And we are, in some of these dysfunctional families, we are creating a social environment that people don't feel safe in, because of the few that are living and have been brought up in that way. If you have a child that hasn't been nurtured, haven't bonded, then when they get into their teens, they're not going to listen to you. They are going to fight back. And in fact, only this week I saw a TV program advertising children that actually fight and kick in the door. And these are 10 and 11-year-old children, and how they attack their mothers, and the mothers have to lock themselves in for safety. It's just disbelief, isn't it? Yeah. But this is what can happen if we do not start off right from the beginning. We then create these monsters, and it can be avoided at every stage.
Well, this is clearly a very big and a very emotive topic when we look in more detail at women's abuse and how that affects not just the woman, but the wider family, and no doubt the environment in which they live. I'd like to thank you once again, Joy, for coming to the Sanctuary and offering a new approach to the problem.
My pleasure. Thank you.